The palace of the Pharaoh rose above the Nile like a god's throne, its walls gleaming with limestone that caught the sun and blinded the eyes of those who dared look too long. But beneath its foundations, hidden from the gaze of priests, scribes, and even the Pharaoh's court, lay a secret world carved into stone, a labyrinth of chambers where the Pharaoh's hidden wives lived. To the unknowing, these chambers were paradise. The walls were painted with lotus blossoms and falcons in flight, their colors preserved by the coolness of the underground air. Lamps of bronze burned with perfumed oil, filling the corridors with the scent of myrrh and cinnamon. Silken cushions lay scattered across alabaster floors, and golden goblets brimmed with pomegranate wine. But to the women who lived there, this paradise was a cage. They were chosen not for alliances or dowries, but for secrecy. They were the Pharaoh's indulgence, his hidden treasures, locked away from the world. They could not walk the gardens above, nor show their faces to the court. Their beauty was for the Pharaoh alone, and for each other, as rivals. Among them was Nephara, the Nubian, her skin dark as polished obsidian, her laughter sharp as a blade. She had been taken as a symbol of conquest, but she carried herself like a queen, her every glance a reminder that she had once been free. There was Isira, the merchant's daughter from the coast, pale and calculating, her fingers always adorned with rings she twisted when she plotted. She had grown up among ships and trade routes, and she measured every word as though it were a bargain to be struck. And there was Khepri, the singer, whose voice was said to soothe even the gods. She was the youngest, her innocence a mask that hid her hunger for recognition. Each woman was adorned with jewels, their hair braided with threads of gold. They looked like goddesses in their silks, but their eyes betrayed them. Every smile was edged with venom. Every compliment was a test. At night, when the palace above fell silent, the wives gathered in the central hall. They reclined on cushions, sipping wine, their laughter echoing against the stone. But beneath the laughter, there was tension. A spilled cup of wine might be an accident or a warning. A compliment about a necklace might conceal a threat. A glance held too long might spark a feud that would smolder for weeks. They were bound together by circumstance, but divided by ambition. Each knew that the Pharaoh's favor could elevate her above the rest, perhaps even into the light of official recognition. And so, every gesture, every word was part of a dangerous game. Above them, the Pharaoh slept in his golden chamber, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his feet. He believed his hidden wives were docile treasures, content in their silken prison. He did not see the rivalries, the whispered threats, the hunger in their eyes. But the wives knew. They knew that power was not only in crowns and armies. Power could be taken in whispers, in rituals, in the shadows where no scribe dared write. And so, The gilded prison was not merely a cage, it was a battlefield, one where beauty was a weapon, and survival meant learning to strike before being struck. The nights in the gilded prison were long, and silence often pressed against the walls like a second skin. Yet on one such night, when the lamps burned low, and the wives lay restless on their jeweled cushions, a figure slipped into their chamber. She was no servant, nor one of their own. She was a priestess, cloaked in linen the color of ash, her eyes lined with kohl so dark it seemed to swallow the lamplight. She spoke not with the deference of a servant, but with the authority of one who carried secrets older than the Pharaoh himself. Her voice was low, almost a chant, as she told them of Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, and ecstasy, but also of power. Hathor's rites, she whispered, were not the gentle prayers sung in temples for fertility or joy. These were the forbidden invocations, the ones erased from scrolls, the ones that promised dominion over the hearts and minds of men. The wives leaned closer, their jeweled anklets chiming softly as they shifted. Nephara's eyes gleamed with hunger, Isira's fingers tightened around her rings, and Khepri's lips parted as though she were already singing the goddess's name. The priestess taught them gestures, chants, and the mixing of oils that could bend desire into chains. She told them that if performed at the right hour, beneath the right stars, the Pharaoh's dreams could be guided, his will softened, his body weakened or inflamed at their choosing. At first, the wives laughed, pretending disbelief, but when the priestess traced a symbol in wine upon the alabaster floor, the lamps flickered violently, and the air grew heavy with the scent of lotus. The laughter died. In its place came silence, thick and trembling. The priestess warned them that such rites demanded secrecy and sacrifice, a drop of blood, a whispered vow, a fragment of the soul itself. Yet she also promised that the one who mastered them could rise above all others, perhaps even above the Pharaoh himself. When she vanished as suddenly as she had come, the wives sat in silence, their eyes darting from one to another. Each woman knew the others had heard the same words, learned the same forbidden gestures. Each knew that the game they played had just shifted into something far more dangerous. That night, as the palace above lay in slumber, the wives did not sleep. They lay awake on their silken beds, whispering the goddess's name into the darkness, each one plotting how to wield the power of Hathor for herself. And so, the first seeds of betrayal were sown, not with daggers or poison, but with whispers to a goddess who thrived on desire and destruction. The Pharaoh's chamber was a sanctum of gold and silence, its walls painted with victories, its ceilings carved with stars. Yet on this night, the silence was broken by his restless turning. His sleep, once deep and untroubled, had become a battlefield. tumult of visions. The wives below had begun their rites, and their whispers reached him like invisible threads tugging at his mind. In his dream, the Nile ran red, not with blood, but with wine, and women stood upon its banks, their eyes glowing like embers. They called his name, their voices weaving together in a song that was both worship and command. He saw crowns multiplying upon his head until his neck bent beneath their weight. He reached for his scepter, but it melted into a serpent that coiled round his arm and whispered in a woman's voice. He awoke, gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as though he had fought a war in his sleep. The next morning, his decrees startled the court. He granted favor to a Nubian envoy, though his advisors had counseled caution. He ordered new ships for the merchant fleets, though the treasury strained under war expenses. And he summoned a singer to his chamber, demanding her voice soothe his restless spirit. Each decision mirrored the secret desires of the wives below, their rituals bending his will like reeds in the river's current. Nephara smiled when she heard of the envoy's welcome, her chant having taken root in his dreams. Isara's lips tightened, her rings twisting on her fingers as she realized her rival had gained ground. Khepri returned from the Pharaoh's chamber with trembling hands and a secret smile, her song now a weapon sharper than any blade. The wives began to watch one another with sharper eyes. Their laughter in the central hall grew brittle, their compliments edged with poison. A spilled cup of wine was no longer a careless gesture, but a declaration of war. They had tasted the power of Hathor's rites, and they knew the Pharaoh's mind was no longer his own. But the Pharaoh himself did not see the danger. He believed his unrest was the work of the gods, a test of his strength. He prayed at dawn, offering incense to Ra, never knowing that the true prayers shaping his fate were whispered in the chambers beneath his feet. That night his dreams returned, darker still. He saw the palace walls cracking, shadows slipping through the fractures. He saw women crowned in gold, their faces hidden behind veils, their hands dripping with blood. And when he reached for his throne, it crumbled into sand. He awoke again, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. The court whispered that the Pharaoh was troubled by omens. The priests muttered of curses. But in the gilded prison, the wives knew the truth. Their whispers had become chains, and the Pharaoh, master of Egypt, was no longer master of himself. And so the game deepened. What had begun as a test of beauty and charm had become a war of shadows, fought not with swords, but with dreams. The air in the gilded prison grew heavier with each passing night. The wives had tasted the power of Hathor's whispers, and now every glance, every word carried the weight of suspicion. What had begun as rivalry was hardening into open hostility. The Pharaoh's shifting decrees had already revealed whose rituals had taken hold, and jealousy burned like a hidden flame. It was Isira, the merchant's daughter, who first turned to darker methods. She had grown up among traders who knew that wealth was not only in gold, but in secrets, poisons, and powders carried in hidden jars. While the others whispered chants and sang to the goddess, Isira began to mix perfumes in silence. She blended lotus oil with crushed herbs, their fragrance sweet enough to mask the bitterness of the venom she stirred into the mixture. The perfume was subtle, intoxicating. A single drop on the skin would leave the body weakened, the mind clouded, the spirit vulnerable. She tested it first on a bird brought by a servant, watching as its wings faltered, its song fading into silence. Satisfied, she poured the oil into alabaster jars, sealing them with wax and marking them with the Pharaoh's crest so no one would question their origin. When she offered the perfume to her rivals, she did so with a smile as smooth as silk. "A gift," she said, her voice honeyed. "The Pharaoh favors those who shine brightest. This will make your beauty unforgettable." Nephara accepted with suspicion, her sharp eyes narrowing, while Khepri, eager to please, dabbed the oil upon her wrists without hesitation. The effects were not immediate. That was the brilliance of Isira's craft. Days later, Khepri's voice faltered during a song, her throat tightening as though unseen hands pressed against it. Nephara, though stronger, began to feel her limbs grow heavy, her laughter less sharp, her gaze less commanding. The other wives whispered that the goddess was punishing them for their arrogance, but Isira knew the truth. The palace healers were summoned, their hands tracing charms, their mouths muttering prayers. They found nothing. To them the wives were simply weary, their bodies weakened by the heat of the underground chambers. They did not see the poison hidden in the perfume, nor the ambition hidden in Isira's smile. But Nephara was not so easily undone. Even as her strength waned, she watched Isira with eyes that burned like coals. She knew the scent of betrayal when it lingered in the air. And though Khepri coughed and trembled, her innocence stripped away, she too began to suspect that the perfume was no blessing. The gilded prison, once filled with laughter edged by rivalry, now reeked of fear. Every jar of oil, every cup of wine, every morsel of food was suspect. The wives no longer trusted one another, nor the servants who carried their trays. They lived in luxury, but every jewel, every cushion, every drop of perfume had become a weapon. Above them, the Pharaoh continued to dream, his mind clouded by whispers and shadows. He did not see that the true war was no longer for his favor, but for survival itself. And in the darkness of her chamber, Isira twisted her rings and smiled. For in the game of shadows, she had struck the first true blow. The gilded prison had grown quieter since the poisoned perfumes began their work. Laughter no longer echoed through the alabaster halls. Instead, whispers clung to the air like smoke. The wives moved carefully now, their jeweled anklets muffled by caution, their eyes darting with suspicion. Yet beneath the tension, something deeper stirred, a secret waiting to be unearthed. It was Nephara who discovered it. One restless night, when the others slept, she wandered the hidden corridors that wound like veins beneath the palace. She carried only a lamp, its flame trembling against the painted walls. Her steps led her to a chamber long abandoned, its door sealed with dust and cobwebs. Inside, she found a chest carved with symbols older than the Pharaoh's reign, symbols she recognized not from Egypt, but from her own people. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside lay fragments of scrolls, brittle with age, and a necklace of obsidian bead strung with gold. The scrolls told of a dynasty crushed generations ago, a Nubian line that had once ruled lands along the Nile before the Pharaoh's ancestors conquered them. And there, in faded ink, was her family's name. Her breath caught. She was not merely a wife hidden in the shadows of the Pharaoh's palace. She was the last daughter of a fallen dynasty, her bloodline erased from history but not extinguished. The realization burned within her like fire. She had not been chosen for her beauty alone. She had been taken as a trophy, a reminder of conquest. Rage welled in her chest, sharper than any dagger. The Pharaoh who lay above her, dreaming under the influence of whispered rites, was the heir of the man who had destroyed her people. Every luxury she had been given was not a gift, but a chain. Every jewel she wore was a mockery of her stolen crown. When she returned to the wives' chamber, her face was calm, her smile as sharp as ever. But inside, her purpose had changed. No longer would she fight only for favor or survival. She would fight for vengeance, for the restoration of a bloodline buried in silence. The others noticed the shift. Isira saw the fire in her eyes and grew wary. Khepri, weakened by the poisoned oils, felt a chill when Nephara's gaze lingered on her. None of them knew the truth, but they sensed it, that something ancient and dangerous had awakened in her. Above, the Pharaoh continued to dream, unaware that the woman he thought a hidden jewel was in truth a blade, sharpened by history, waiting for the moment to strike. And so the gilded prison no longer held only rivals. It now held a queen in exile, a woman whose blood carried the weight of vengeance and whose heart beat with the promise of retribution. The gilded prison had become a nest of suspicion. Perfumes were no longer worn without fear. Food was tasted twice before lips touched it, and every servant's step was followed with sharp eyes. Yet in this climate of mistrust, two women found themselves circling closer, drawn together not by friendship, but by necessity. Isira, the merchant's daughter, had proven her cunning with poisons and perfumes. She knew the others feared her, and she relished it. But fear alone could not secure her place. She needed an ally, someone with strength and fire, someone who could strike where she could not. That someone was Nephara. Nephara, still burning with the revelation of her bloodline, carried herself with a new gravity. She was no longer merely a rival wife. She was a queen in exile, her every thought consumed by vengeance. Yet vengeance required patience, and patience required allies. She had seen Isira's craft, her subtlety, her ability to wound without lifting a blade. And though she despised her, she also recognized her value. Their first conversation was cautious, spoken in whispers as they reclined on opposite ends of the chamber, their words masked by the sound of Khepri's faltering song. "You strike with shadows," Nephara murmured, her eyes fixed on the flickering lamp. "But shadows alone cannot topple a throne." "And fire alone burns too quickly," Isira replied, twisting her rings. "Together, shadow and fire can consume an empire." It was not trust that bound them, but ambition. They agreed to share secrets, to divide their influence, to weaken the Pharaoh not as rivals, but as co-conspirators. Nephara would use her presence, her commanding gaze to draw the Pharaoh's attention. Isira would weave her poisons and whispers into his dreams, ensuring his strength waned with each passing night. But even as they clasped hands in a silent pact, both women thought the same thought. "When the time comes, I will betray her first." Their alliance was fragile, a bridge built over a pit of serpents. Yet for now, it gave them power. Together, they began to manipulate the servants, planting rumors in the palace above. They whispered of the Pharaoh's failing health, of omens in his dreams, of curses that clung to his reign. The generals grew uneasy, the priests muttered of divine displeasure, and the court began to tremble. Khepri, weakened and isolated, watched from the shadows. She saw the two women draw closer, their whispers growing longer, their laughter sharper. She knew something was being plotted, but she could not pierce the veil of their alliance. And so she sang alone, her voice trembling, her heart filling with dread. Above, the Pharaoh's sleep grew darker. His dreams were no longer of rivers and crowns, but of women veiled in shadow, their hands dripping with blood. He awoke each morning weaker, his decrees more erratic, his eyes haunted. He did not know that the true rulers of his palace were no longer his priests or generals, but two women hidden beneath his feet, weaving an alliance of shadows that one day would bring him to his knees. And so the prison became a court of its own, ruled not by love or loyalty, but by ambition and deceit. The alliance was born, and with it the promise of betrayal yet to come. The bathhouse of the gilded prison was a place of ritual and delusion. Steam rose in curling veils from pools lined with alabaster, scented with lotus and rose petals. Here the wives shed their silks and jewels, their bodies gleaming with oils, their laughter echoing against the stone. To the servants who tended them, it was a vision of paradise. But beneath the surface, the bathhouse was as dangerous as any battlefield. It was here that the first true betrayal unfolded. The wives gathered as they always did, their rivalry masked by languid gestures and soft words. Nephara reclined against the edge of the pool, her obsidian eyes half closed, though her mind was sharp and restless. Isira sat nearby, her rings glinting as she toyed with a vial of perfume, her smile unreadable. Khepri, weakened but still radiant, sang softly to herself, her voice trembling like a reed in the wind. Among the servants, moving silently through the steam, was one who had long been trusted, a girl who had grown up within the palace walls, who had carried oils and towels since childhood. She had been the wives' confidant, their messenger, their shadow. But on this day, her loyalty faltered. The Pharaoh had grown suspicious. His dreams had become too strange, his decrees too erratic. Whispers of curses reached his ears, and he demanded answers. The servant girl, frightened of punishment, chose survival over loyalty. She slipped from the bathhouse one night and carried her secret to the Pharaoh. The wives had been performing forbidden rites, whispering to gods not meant to be invoked. When the Pharaoh confronted them, he did not do so openly. Instead, he sent spies into the bathhouse, men hidden behind carved screens, listening to every word. And the wives, unaware, spoke too freely. Nephara mocked his weakness. Isira boasted of her poisons, and Khepri, desperate to prove her worth, whispered of the chants she had sung into his dreams. The betrayal was complete. The Pharaoh's suspicion hardened into fury, yet he did not strike at once. He allowed the wives to believe themselves safe, to continue their games of perfume and whispers. He let them think their power was growing, even as he plotted their downfall. But within the gilded prison, the wives sensed a shift. The servants' eyes lingered too long. The guards' footsteps echoed closer than before. The air in the bathhouse grew colder, the steam heavier, as though the walls themselves were listening. And though the wives did not yet know it, the first crack in their hidden empire had been struck, not by poison or ritual, but by betrayal from within. The bathhouse, once a place of luxury, had become a stage for treachery. And the wives, still laughing, still plotting, did not realize that their every word was now a weapon turned against them. The Pharaoh's palace, once a beacon of order and divine authority, had begun to feel the weight of unseen cracks. His decrees, clouded by the whispers of the hidden wives, rippled outward into the empire like stones cast into the Nile. What seemed small within the palace walls grew monstrous in the world beyond. Merchants grumbled in the markets of Thebes, confused by sudden shifts in trade. Caravans were granted favor one day and denied the next. Grain shipments were redirected without reason, leaving villages hungry, while storehouses in the capital overflowed. The people whispered that the Pharaoh had lost the god's blessing, that his mind was no longer his own. In the barracks, the generals grew restless. Scouts returned with news of foreign armies gathering at the borders, Libyan raiders to the west, Hittite envoys turning cold in the north, and whispers of rebellion stirring in Nubia. Yet when the generals sought the Pharaoh's counsel, they found him distracted, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights, his words drifting into riddles. He spoke of dreams filled with veiled women and rivers of blood, of crowns that crumbled into sand. His commanders left the throne room uneasy, muttering that Egypt's strength was faltering. The priests, too, felt the tremors. They burned incense in the great temples, chanting prayers to Ra and Osiris, but the omens grew darker. The sacred ibis refused to eat. The river's floodwaters came too early, and a solar eclipse cast a shadow over the city. To the priests, these were signs of divine displeasure. To the hidden wives, they were proof that their whispers had reached beyond the Pharaoh's chamber and into the very fabric of the empire. In the gilded prison, the wives watched the chaos with a mixture of triumph and fear. Nephara saw the unrest as the first step toward vengeance, her bloodline's justice unfolding. Isira twisted her rings, calculating how to turn the empire's weakness into her own strength. Khepri, though weakened, felt dread coiled in her chest, for she alone still believed that the gods might punish them for their blasphemy. The palace itself seemed to tremble with unease. Servants moved quickly, their eyes lowered, their whispers sharp. Guards lingered longer at their posts, their hands tight on their spears. Even the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were listening. And above it all, the Pharaoh sat upon his throne, his crown gleaming, but his spirit hollow. He was still the ruler of Egypt in name, but his empire was slipping from his grasp. The true battle was not at the borders, nor in the temples, but beneath his very feet, in the chambers of the hidden wives, where ambition and betrayal were weaving a curse strong enough to shake dynasties. The empire trembled, and though no one yet dared to say it aloud, all felt the same truth. Egypt's greatest threat was not from without, but from within. The moon rose over Thebes like a silver blade, its light spilling across the palace walls and seeping into the hidden chambers below. In the gilded prison, the wives prepared for the most dangerous rite they had ever dared attempt, the ritual that would bind the Pharaoh's soul. The air was thick with incense, the smoke curling into shapes that seemed almost alive. Alabaster bowls brimmed with oils, wine, and blood from a dove sacrificed at dawn. The wives moved in silence, their jeweled anklets muffled by the weight of what they were about to do. This was no game of perfumes or whispered chants. This was the night they would seize the Pharaoh himself, not through seduction or poison, but through the chains of the unseen world. Nephara stood at the center, her obsidian eyes burning with vengeance. She traced symbols on the floor with a mixture of wine and ash, each stroke a curse against the dynasty that had crushed her bloodline. Isera circled her, sprinkling powders into the flames, her mind calculating every outcome, every betrayal yet to come. Khepri, trembling but resolute, lifted her voice in song, her melody haunting, her notes carrying into the very stones of the palace. Above them, the Pharaoh stirred in his chamber, his dreams twisted into visions of veiled women standing over him, their hands outstretched, their voices commanding. He felt his body grow heavy, his breath shallow, as though invisible chains were wrapping around his chest. He tried to cry out, but his voice was stolen by the shadows. The wives pressed on. Their voices rose together, chanting the forbidden names of Hathor, calling upon the goddess not for love, but for dominion. The lamps flickered violently, the walls groaned as though the palace itself resisted. The air grew colder, and the scent of lotus turned acrid like burning flesh. Then came the demand. The ritual, whispered to them by the priestess long ago, required a sacrifice, not of animals, not of jewels, but of blood freely given, the life of one among them. The wives froze, their voices faltering. None had expected the goddess to demand so steep a price. Nephara's gaze hardened. She thought of her dynasty, of vengeance. Isera's fingers tightened around her rings, her mind racing. Khepri's song broke into silence, her eyes wide with terror. For the first time, the three women who had played at power realized the true cost of what they sought. The Pharaoh gasped in his chamber, his body convulsing as the chains of the ritual tightened. His crown slipped from his head, clattering to the floor. The empire itself seemed to tremble, the Nile's waters lashing against its banks, the stars above dimming as though the heavens turned away. And in the gilded prison, the wives faced the truth. To bind the Pharaoh's soul, one of them must fall. The night of broken chains had begun, and before dawn, nothing in Egypt would ever be the same. Dawn broke over Thebes, but the light that spilled across the palace walls felt dim, as though the sun itself recoiled from what had transpired in the night. The Pharaoh, once the living god of Egypt, lay broken in his chamber. His crown had fallen, his breath shallow, his eyes clouded with shadows that no priest could banish. The ritual of the wives had succeeded. His soul was no longer his own. In the gilded prison, silence reigned. The wives sat apart, their silks clinging to their skin, their eyes hollow from what they had done. The ritual had demanded a sacrifice, and though none had fallen by blade, each had given something of themselves. Nephara's fire burned dimmer, her vengeance tempered by the weight of blood on her hands. Isera's cunning had sharpened into paranoia, every shadow a threat, every whisper a betrayal. Khepri's voice, once her gift, had cracked into silence, her song stolen by the goddess she had dared to invoke. Yet they had won. The Pharaoh's decrees no longer came from his own mind. but from theirs. Servants carried their words upward. Generals bowed to their unseen commands, and priests trembled at omens they could not explain. From the shadows, the hidden wives ruled Egypt. But victory carried a curse. The rights of Hathor were not gifts freely given. They were chains that bound as tightly as they freed. Each night, the wives felt the goddess's hunger gnaw at them. Their dreams were filled with visions of endless sacrifice, rivers of blood, crowns of thorns, and veiled figures demanding more. Their beauty began to wither, their bodies marked by unseen hands. Jewels felt heavy, perfumes turned bitter, and every mirror reflected not triumph, but decay. The empire too bore the weight of their curse. The Nile's floods grew erratic, harvests faltered, and whispers of rebellion spread like fire through the villages. The people no longer saw the Pharaoh as divine. They saw him as cursed, his reign tainted by unseen forces. And though the wives held power, they could not stop the empire itself from unraveling beneath them. In the end, the gilded prison was no longer a cage, nor a throne. It was a tomb. The wives, once rivals, once victors, now sat in silence, their eyes haunted, their hands trembling. They had seized power, but in doing so, they had bound themselves to a fate darker than any they had imagined. The Pharaoh had fallen, but so too had they, and Egypt, once the jewel of the world, now lay in the hands of cursed queens whose whispers would echo through history, not as rulers, but as a warning. The curse of power was complete.